Chapter 8. You gotta let me in. I'm his business associate. I work for Biocen, his company based in Thailand. Michael shows his company ID to the guard. I'm sorry, but visiting hours are done. We can't let anyone in to see him. The guard hands the ID back to Mike. But he knows me. If you went and told him I'm down here, you'd see he'd want me up there. If I let you in, then I'd have to let everyone in, press included. I'm not press. I'm the guy who he's been trying to contact since he's been here. Mike raises his right hand up so the guard can clearly see the paper. There might be a danger to his life. There are 2 police on watch. I assure you he's safe. Michael brings his hand down as he taps the paper twice with each finger. Sighing because he hides his habit, he clears his mind and pleads to the logical side of the guard. He switches the paper from his right hand to his left hand to complete his ritual. I'm sure he's safe, but if you take this, he places the ID on the desk, and show it to one of his nurses, I'm sure they'll recognize the name. The guard looks at the ID and then up to Mike, finding a similarity between the two. He picks up the white phone on the desk and looks over the list of numbers. Finding the right floor, he presses a sequence of buttons. He growls in a low voice that one of the Frenchman's nurses should report to the front desk. He looks up to Mike through his thick glasses. Someone will be right down. Good. Mike pulls out his camels. I'll be outside. He opens the front doors and puts his cigarette in his mouth. He pulls out a book of matches and sighs over his lost Zippo. The fire sticks light cigarettes adequately, but a brass Zippo with scuff marks only years of use could bring about would do the job with style. He shakes out the match and flicks it into the street. As he exhales the first puff of smoke, he leans back on the wall and shakes his head. In his head, he wonders, why is this so hard? Why is this simple moment in time being stretched out by other people? Do they have nothing better to do? I guess not. This is only his station in life. He is just doing his job. No reason to blame him for my self-destruction. He ashes the camel. It's just the world at large. That this station in life depicts the distrust and fear in the world. This is a structure dedicated to healing, and there is so little honor in this land that we have to protect sick from scavengers and weak predators. Michael was so lost in thought that he didn't see the nurse come to the front desk. She took one look at the ID and nodded at the guard. Michael turns as he thinks of the 3 layers of existence, how protection is given to those physically sick, how we seek protection from the mentally sick, and how the emotionally sick are forced to walk in society. He tosses his cigarette into the street as the nurse waved him in. He rides the elevator with her and follows her into the room with guards at the door, an open window, and no Joachim. Michael storms out of the front doors this time and quickly makes his way towards 2nd Avenue. He pulls a camel to his lips and puffs as he tosses the match into oncoming traffic. He walks fast, releasing plumes of smoke that accent the machine he is. You have to understand that Michael could be considered a Jnana yogi. His beliefs are somewhere between pagan and atheist to a Catholic mind, and Michael was born into a Catholic family. He found Mass to be a celebration of the connection between what we are and what we take into our bodies. Suffice to say, he liked the ceremony, but the mindset wasn't for him. He finds his peace through knowledge. He is an observer, watching the consequences of life unfold around him and recording the results. The idea behind this path to the divine is that in learning one particular aspect of life to the fullest, we open up a divine understanding in the self. As if you could understand everything about the internal combustion engine by knowing every aspect of the spark plug. This would eventually lead to the properties of kinetic energy. Get the picture? The point is, if there is a hell, Michael is the perfect example of life in it. Michael can find the divine in himself if he learns all he can about what interests him. This would be great if Michael played hockey for a living, but he found his calling in the ever-expanding world of technologies. Computers and the field of business related to them have so many facets that learning all there is would take lifetimes. Add on to this the fact that technology is constantly changing, and you can see that one will never know all there is to know about the machines mankind creates. Michael's personality is some kind of cruel joke played by the divine, and to keep himself unaware of the hell he's in, his mind produces little tricks that keep him occupied, like his aversions to the number 2, and the heightening of senses. As Michael walks through the city, he begins to listen to the world around him. The cool breeze that blows by him quiets, and he hears the sounds of the traffic flowing through the city. Under his feet, he can feel the vibrations as subways glide. His hearing expands and picks up the voices of people as they converse and communicate. He rides the winds and floats through the metallic trenches with skyscraper walls. He can feel the electricity pulsing through the buildings and the flapping of pigeon wings. He climbs higher and notices the roar of a passing plane, along with the whirring of helicopter blades and the chug of boats on the Hudson. His mind takes him higher until the city's orchestra is nothing more than a single humming note on a backdrop of the earth's silence. Then a thumping. The thumping of his heart, the rhythm of his breath. He returns to his body. Thinking he is the only one who understands the unity of the city, that the complexities inside are nothing but the current of human energy passing between lives, that humans are only vehicles for that energy, used to help it produce the massive circuit called New York City. There is someone else who could understand that. Someone who could appreciate that as well. So Michael aims himself south, and soon found himself in front of the costume shop that Farrell lives above. He moves to ring the bell, but finds the front door slightly open. Cautiously, he walks into the vestibule. He is trying to decide which of the 4 bells would be hers when another tenant walks out of the door. Understanding the man's concern for the safety of his neighbors, Michael hands him a $50 bill as he asked for directions to Farrah's apartment. The man shrugs and takes the bill. Michael rolls his jaw and hands over another $50, which the man takes as he opens the door with his key. As Michael walks in, the man closes the door behind him, telling him to make a right at the top of the first flight. Mike doesn't say thank you. About halfway up the stairs, Michael notices that the door to the apartment is open. No lights are on, and he can hear music being played at a low volume. He walks in and finds the place empty. The main room is split between a living room and bedroom. The 2 dressers next to the bed look as if a bomb had gone off in them, scattering the clothes all over. 2 dead plants sit in pots next to the television. The stereo is on and playing a song from the latest Pearl Jam CD. To his left is the kitchen, which looks somewhat clean, but not totally. To his right, on the other side of the big room, is a door. He walks over slowly and sees that there is no knob. He puts his index finger through the hole where the knob should be and pulls the door open. Inside, he sees a room illuminated by the streetlight outside. Along the walls are paintings and sculptures. In the middle of the room is the petite silhouette of Farah, with chisel and hammer in hand. She's leaned over the piece she's working on, and doing so in her underwear. Michael becomes semi-hard immediately. She hears the squeak of the door on its hinges and doesn't even turn around. "Don't you believe in knocking?" Mike knocks on the door's frame. That's better. She turns around, her dark tangle swaying with the movement. She moves out of the way, and Mike sees the bust of the man's face. She remains quiet as Michael looks at the sculpture. She walks to her right and puts on the green shirt that was draped over the back of the chair. "Who's the bust of?" he asks, trying to keep himself from watching her. "That's the guy who hit you in the head yesterday. What happened to you anyway? I've been worried." Michael walks closer to the bust, studying the face, realizing that she's right. "I'm fine." He's still looking at the bust. "This is an incredible likeness." He turns to her as she's jumping into her jeans. "You know, the police have sketch artists to do this." "I'm not going to the police." She picks up the hammer and chisel and walks towards the door. Michael spins around. "What? Why?" She stops at the door and turns around to face him. Leaning her right arm on the door's frame at the elbow, she flicks away flakes of stone from the chisel's edge. She swallows hard. "Hey," Mike says, getting her attention. "Why?" Her eyes go from Michael to the bust. "Because he's my father." She looks back to Michael as his jaw drops. "Life's funny, ain't it?" She turns around and walks into the kitchen. "I don't find it funny," he says, following her. "I mean, he's your father, okay, but he still committed a crime. He should pay for what he did to me." Farah rinses the chisel off in the sink. "And what he did to Joachim." She shuts the water off and still looks down to the sink's basin. "Then you turn him in." She places the chisel on the counter and walks to the bed/living room. "I want nothing to do with him." "What do you mean?" Michael follows her again. She turns around suddenly and Mike almost collides with her. "That bastard left me and my mother to fend for ourselves in a shitty little town in the middle of bumblefuck Arizona. He just up and left when I was 14 to live with some bitch he worked with. My mother didn't want to be in Arizona, but she went along with him, and then the bastard just leaves her out there. We had to move in with my grandmother in San Francisco, and my mom had to be a secretary. We struggled our way through it, though, and 2 years later, when I sold my first piece, we moved to New York. She remarried and moved back to California, and I stayed, living the life I had created for myself without the help of my father." She sits down on the bed and looks at the floor for a minute. She looks up to see Mike. "He's my father, so I won't turn him in. I won't see him for the same reason." There's silence for a moment. Michael sighs and sits on the coffee table. "Your father is just a man. He should have been there for me. He should have helped to mold my life." "He did." Farrell looks at Mike. "He tried, but he's just guessing, like the rest of us. Just because he is a father doesn't mean he suddenly understands it all. He did the best he could. It wasn't good enough. Michael stands up suddenly. Stop it! He points at Farah and tries to curb his anger. She's startled by his sudden temper. You have no right to judge someone like that. He's my father. I'm the only one who can judge his paternal ability. And he was bad at being. Michael cuts her off. At least you had a father. Farah, stunned by this, her eyes go wide. Michael turns around and rubs his eyes with his right hand, preparing himself for this. He takes a deep breath. My father died the day I was born. He was rushing to the hospital from work and got into a car accident. He turns around to face her. 2 months later, my mother killed herself. Tears well up in his eyes, but he holds them back. I had no idea, she says. He shakes his head. I lived with my grandmother until I was 22. She died 3 years ago when I was your age. I'm the only family I have. I know what it's like to be alone. He looked into her eyes. But even in death, my father molded my life. The absence of him was his contribution to what I am today. He turns his head. Still, I'd give anything to see him just once. To have him say anything that I could take as fatherly advice. He sits on the coffee table. To know him as the man he was. A single tear rolls down Michael's cheek. Farah could be considered a Raha Yoga. She stays in tune with the divine by experimenting with this plane of existence. She uses the mind to fool itself, creating the boundary that she can expand to reach enlightenment. If her art were audio rather than visual, other musicians would consider her the improvisationalist. This is the best name for her. She follows her instincts and then deals with the outcome as best she can. She feels as though she has called Michael to her by some means that she is unaware of. Whether or not this is true doesn't matter. What matters is that she believes it is true and therefore acts as if it is. She gets up off the bed and walks, stopping in front of him. We're really a lot alike, she says, removing the tears trail from his face with her thumb. How so? He asks, looking up at her. We both know what it's like not to buy Father's Day gifts. He smiles and laughs slightly. She smiles and leans down to kiss him. He turns his head away. No, don't. She has a curious look. She cradles his face in her hand. Why? She asks. Because of Joachim. What about him? When I went back to his apartment yesterday, I saw you and him. Oh, that. She turns around and walks back to the bed. Do you love him? He asks. She turns around to face him, nodding. Yes, he's a great guy. Michael looks down to the floor. I see. He looks back up to her. I'll step aside. Farah has that curious look again. What are you talking about? I mean, if you and he are going to be in an intimate relationship, what do you mean by intimate? I mean, if he and you, if you two, would I sleep with him? Yes. Would you sleep with him? No. A smile uncurls across her face. But I'd sleep with you. A brief silence follows, the type of silence that can't really be described with words, the kind gunfighters hear before they draw. Michael takes a deep breath and stands. From his inside jacket pocket, he pulls a tiny box. He walks to Farah and hands it to her. She opens it and looks at him. "Sapphire," she said. He nods. They fall into each other and onto the bed. She was right. They really are a lot alike. Who would have guessed that the artist and the programmer would be in common? As these two beings meet each other, and as articles of clothing peel away so quickly, it's as if they are evaporating from the heat between them. A great change begins to take place in the world they inhabit. As they caress and move into each other in a sign of mutual respect and love, an energy begins to be created between them. The meshing of their emotions and bodies and the similarities in their minds produces a turning of cosmic wheels that will lead to a furthering of their species. The programmer, being the embodiment of logic, makes a move toward rising above his thoughts and calculated reactions. It still uses them to thrust into the unbounded spiritual plane. The artist, improvising with what she has in this world, grasps at what beauty she can find, to take it into her being and have a defined opinion of what she feels. She then reciprocates the feeling in a way that can be interpreted by others in the world. The joining of these beings creates a spark on the spiritual plane. It sends ripples out across the web of interaction that covers all consciousness. The results of their message, as years later will tell, will bring a new understanding for technology. Logic and spirituality have their connection in these two people who are engaged in an act both sensual and sweaty. It is that connection that helps people first feel and then understand that technology should not be used to indulge the self. It should be used to represent and ultimately communicate the self. Technology, when used properly, could give all people the means to become self-realized. That is, if we used recordings of ourselves as entertainment. Become a world of beings that watch themselves from early ages in hopes of reaching perfection. This could also be turned on the society and help humans learn about themselves as a whole. Oh, wait, I forgot. The evening news has already been invented.